Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. This week I'm talking to Amy LePore, who is a policy expert on the increased federalization of emergency management in this country. She is going to answer the question as to why on earth Homeland Security, FEMA, and their minions on the ground are so hostile to the victims of the hurricane in North Carolina. Check it out. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Amy, it's good to finally meet you in person.
I'm so glad to meet you, Matt.
Yes, your expertise is particularly timely right now, and you actually wrote your PhD on emergency management and the centralization of government power, and you worked in emergency management, and you are a libertarian as well. So you're checking all the boxes I need to get a handle on what's happening in North Carolina and the surrounding areas right now in terms of the response from the federal government. And context for this whole story, because I want to take a step back, is a lot of people, including Elon Musk and Glenn Beck and our own Sarah Higdon, who is part of the Free the People staff. She's on the ground in Asheville right now. A friend of mine, Melissa Mann, actually lives in Asheville. So I'm getting a lot of, I think, substantial corroborated stories about FEMA either being absent or getting in the way, and that the only positive things that are happening in the area are basically private enterprise, civil society, churches. And I think that's a story that is told again and again. But you lived this, like you actually worked. Did you work for FEMA or did you work for emergency management? What did you do?
Yeah, I was responsible for emergency management for a county in Maryland
Okay.
for a long time.
Okay. And that's sort of your libertarian origin story, right?
It is absolutely my origin story. Yeah, no doubt. It didn't take long in that career field to look around, to see our interactions with the public, to see our interactions with FEMA and the other like Department of Homeland funding sources, and to start to ask questions about the impact of that money, the impact of how we treated and how we thought about citizens as important responders. It didn't take long in that career field to make it come full circle for me that I needed to explore a little bit further, which is how I ended up getting my doctorate. I had no intentions of going on to a PhD, but I had big burning questions that I wanted to answer.
Tell me a story that was sort of your eye-opening moment of sort of bureaucratic either diffidence or hostility towards citizens trying to solve problems after an emergency.
I will tell you two quick stories. The first is an anecdote. Tropical Storm Lee came through and impacted the Susquehanna River Valley area, and notably when that happened, Cecil County, Maryland, where I worked, becomes impacted. And there were businesses and homes in a town called Port Deposit. And Port Deposit, if you are from that area, is notorious for flooding. But this was a particularly bad storm, and I had not only the duty to respond in, to build a team, to make sure we could help with those recovery efforts, but also to liaison with the homeowners and the business owners there who, FEMA sent a message for many decades. They even used the term, "We are your federal family," right after 9/11 and after 2012, I think it was. I forget actually which hurricane it was, but they continued to kind of, in iteration, use this term, "We're your federal family. We're leaning forward."
That's a creepy phrase, by the way.
It's an incredibly creepy phase, and I tackle that in some of my work. But in defense of the homeowners, they were led to believe for decades that FEMA could respond, that there was money available, that the Small Business Administration had loans to spare to help with business recovery, and I had the chore of having to tell those homeowners, those businesses, you didn't meet the threshold. Your neighbor did because they had more flooding than you or more damage than you, or your neighboring business did, but your business, there are no loans available to you. So that, for me, that was one of the opportunities for me to really eye-opening for me to see it as an unfair situation. But more than that, we are really misleading the public when we tell them that your local, state, or federal government is prepared to respond in. The good folks from George Mason, they of course know this. This has been kind of in the vein of their research, which is that community networks are most empowering and most able to respond to local needs. They have local knowledge that government planners can't have. But to more specifically answer your question, I think you're kind of leaning on to something I said earlier, which is there's really an opinion about citizens and what they're capable of. In the post 9/11 environment in emergency services, I think that responders were really empowered with what I think of as like a see something, say something mentality, a mentality that was crafted by a domestic war on terror. The idea that we're all fighting Al-Qaeda here. And so your beat cop became not just a guy you know because he gets his hair cut next to you at the barber shop and you know his dad because he coached you in baseball, but responders. And I'm not just talking about law enforcement, but this I think seeps down into the EMS world, certainly the emergency management world. The opinion of the citizen became almost adversarial. There are responders, there are people who kind of have a badge and some authority, and really I think this was built up by the Homeland Security advent, and I think their opinion of the citizen became lesser. It was almost a separation that I could see in my own career, and I didn't like it, which again is another thing that led me down the road of wanting to ask why.
Yeah. So you left that job at some point and decided to get your PhD in emergency management. Basically, what is your degree in?
Yeah, the degree itself is in public policy, so more of a broad public policy. Folks would know it now as the Biden School of Public Policy.
Interesting.
It wasn't that when I was studying there. So, but I
this is back when Biden was sentient, I suspect.
That is questionable, but it certainly was back when he was storing his documents that we're not allowed to see at the University of Delaware. So it checks out. So the degree itself was in urban affairs and public policy. And in choosing a dissertation topic and choosing something I would submerge myself in for a couple of years, I was part-time. I was still working at the time. So I wanted to take a look at I wanted to really dig into the things I thought I saw. Because I looked at my colleagues and I thought, if I'm seeing this as an emergency manager, what are my colleagues in other jurisdictions seeing? And so I launched what I, at this point, still believe to be the only nationwide study of 2,300 plus counties, and I surveyed their emergency managers. The response was, I think, 700 in full, so a decent response rate for that kind of study. And I asked them what they thought about emergency management. I asked them how they intend to use the money. Does the money, and this is really kind of the crux of it, I asked them, does the money impact how you respond? Does it impede your ability to use local knowledge to respond appropriately? Because you're going after federal dollars. And you know, as I do, the federal compliance metrics puts a whole new dimension on grant funding and operations. And overwhelmingly, their answer was yeah. And then that was made even worse by a follow-up question, which is, okay, so federal funding impedes your ability to respond appropriately in your local community. Are you applying for other types of funding? Are you looking to shift away from federal funding? If we can see it as unhealthy for your jurisdiction, are you moving away from that? And overwhelmingly, and I mean like in the 90th percent, the response was no. We're not trying to do something different. There is an addiction.
Captured.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And but those questions, for someone who might be watching, those questions may seem straightforward. Of course they want the money. Of course they don't. But it is important to understand because there is a second piece to this. It's not just that they are using federal funds. It's that those federal funds come with compliance and dictates and require so much administrative work that how could the emergency management team be doing anything other? They're not engaged in local planning if they're filling out grant paperwork for the feds.
Yeah.
And in small shops like the one I worked in, you have to make that decision.
It becomes completely centralized and bureaucratized, And it's also so it reminds me I've been obsessed with the disastrous government response to COVID, and in the process of digging and digging and digging, you discover that the reason Anthony Fauci had so much power is that he sat on top a pile of money. The NIH, after 9/11, there's an analogy here with what you're describing. After 9/11, Fauci got all this money and power, and basically centralized scientific research and medical research at universities. And without the imprimatur of NIH, you couldn't do anything, which means you couldn't question the NIH blessed paradigm. And that's precisely what you're talking about here. That it becomes this centralized bureaucracy where local knowledge, to your earlier story, local knowledge is not only not respected, it's demonized and mistrusted.
And I'll go a step further, because it's absolutely the case. COVID, I think for me, when I look back at the merge between DHS and FEMA after 9/11, the onslaught of funds into state and local jurisdictions, the next stop where I thought, oh, the things I've been concerned about appear to be coming to pass, was COVID. Because I think that in the murky background of COVID, if you think only about local operations, how health departments responded, how local law enforcement, how local EMS responded, in the background of that lurks that attitude we talked about, which is an opinion, a heated opinion born of this domestic war on terror attitude that I think many first responders carry with them. Not all, but many. And so I think that everything that happened between 9/11 and 2020, roughly, set the stage for what local responders were willing to do. Local public health was thrilled to receive money to roll out a vaccine they knew nothing about. Local law enforcement was more than happy to arrest a guy on a beach, or a family playing softball, right? Or someone who didn't want to wear a mask. In our own county, we have a friend and colleague who simply didn't want to wear a mask. She even went equipped with a medical note to a school board, and the cops pulled her out of there. The mentality that was born of this merger between terrorism and natural disaster, which is really where FEMA's focus was prior to 9/11, that merger made far worse the idea that, well, I don't believe in a federal government anyway. So that we have federal agencies is something we just deal with. But that merger, and not only the money that came after, but the attitude that was instilled in local response, really set the stage for what they were willing to do to their neighbors during COVID, and it is unconscionable.
Fascinating and disgusting. So let's go back to 9/11 and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, or maybe you want to go back a little bit further in terms of the centralization of disaster relief and emergency management. I guess it starts with the establishment of declaring emergencies and what that triggers.
Yeah, this is an excellent point, and one that we can talk about, I think, with some, not just historically, but even modern day. So the disaster declaration is a notoriously politicized process, and I'm sure that no one is surprised about that. But the Stafford Act, if we are taking a look at legislation and policy, which has really has made change, the Stafford Act really set in stone that declaration process and heightened the extent to which it was politicized. And so you see kind of a competition across administrations and across states, a race for the money, and a lessening of what the parameters are to get a declaration. I think when the public hears of an emergency declaration, a presidentially declared state of emergency, they're thinking about something like Hurricane Katrina or Sandy or Maria or what we are dealing with now. But the truth is there are presidential emergency declarations for snow removal. An example, in my own career, I think twice Cecil County received record-breaking snowfall, and with that came hundreds of thousands, if not across the course of $2 million for snow removal. How that becomes the purview of the federal government is nothing I will ever understand. And I worked directly with a set of contractors that FEMA sent in after these snow events. And they would say to us, we would say, well, we had a number of expenses, and these we believe may be covered. And they would say, no, put everything on there, get everything you can. And this is another point in my career where I said, how is this okay? The snow removal from the roads is the responsibility of the federal government, and therefore the responsibility of tax dollars coming from Michigan, California. This is unfair, and this is not a sustainable system. But in terms of declarations, it has been increasingly politicized. You see it play out when there is a declaration and somebody in Kentucky, for example, and you say, well, shouldn't they be rejecting it? Because they have some libertarian-leaning senators and congresspersons coming out of there. And the answer is that provides an opportunity, again, for kind of argument on the federal level and politicization of the process. But it also, as you kind of have noted, COVID. The declaration process during COVID did the same thing, right? The full force of the federal family leaning in on making sure people were vaccinated, couldn't leave their homes, that businesses were shut down, and employing the state and local governments by virtue of giving them lots of money for response. There's CARES Act and the ARPA dollars that provided them an opportunity to respond, continue to build their bureaucracies. Everybody thinks the COVID money probably went to something pertaining to COVID. It's not the case. It's absolutely not the case. They are building buildings with it. They're employing more staff with it. They're taking care of additional public health initiatives with it, and building up their militarized organizations with it as well.
I have exciting news. Our latest documentary, The Free Life, Portrait of an Artist, a project that we've been working on for several years here at Free the People, is finally available to view. This is a story of my friend Carlos Luna, an artist who had to flee communist Cuba in order to create the beautiful things that he does now in Miami, Florida. His grandmother actually told him, you must leave if you want to create your art. It's a beautiful story. It's a hero's journey. And you have an opportunity now to see it for the very first time. Go to watch.freethepeople.org. It's $9.99. This is the first time you'll be able to see it. We've been showing it at film festivals. We've been winning awards. Now you have your chance. I'm eager to hear what you think about it. So check it out. Watch.freethepeople.org. So the Stafford Act, I believe, precedes 9/11.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But it sort of is one of the seeds that are planted that allow for the radical centralization where FEMA gets absorbed by the new Department of Homeland Security.
Mm-hmm. So at post 9/11, when Homeland Security at its inception and it's taking under its wing of FEMA is exactly what I think has caused, it's a two-pronged problem. Not only the funding that came with that for local jurisdictions to buy Bearcats when they have 100 population, but also kind of this, not just the money, but also this attitude, this, we're all in it together, see something, say something, you're fighting Al-Qaeda here in the U.S. mentality that I think mobilized the response community in a way that pits them against the citizen.
And you said this earlier, but it appears to apply particularly towards the Bush administration's inept response to Katrina. I recall, as a guy that was heavily involved in public policy, particularly budget politics, budget policy, I was surprised at this expectation that it was a federal responsibility to fix New Orleans. Mm-hmm. But of course, they had created this expectation with the subsuming of FEMA and Homeland Security that it was now a federal responsibility to do this. And then George W. Bush, bless his heart, says, Brownie, you're doing a great job. And the shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
Was Katrina another sort of benchmark? Like after Katrina, it is a federal responsibility everywhere and always. Is that true, or was it before that?
So I think that because Hurricane Katrina was so devastating in the eyes of anyone who watched, and the news, the 24-hour news cycle laid bare what was going on in Katrina. I think that probably it has set the stage for increasing centralization. I think post Hurricane Katrina, there was a commission. They did some research, and they found much like what we find after 9/11. There was poor planning, poor communications. So kind of reiterated the concerns we have with disaster response generally. But I think that there was never any I think you're correct. There was never really any going back after Hurricane Katrina. And we know two things, from Hurricane Katrina, and we can see them play out today as well. Federal government not only has kind of bears the weight of fiscal responsibility, but it has also built up an expectation from the public they will respond, but they also are an incredible barrier to response.
Yeah.
And it makes one wonder why you would build up such a responsibility, why you would really message that you can be accountable for local disaster, and then it almost feels like work to make it unsuccessful. So we know, do you remember the picture of the buses?
Mm-hmm.
We know that there was an agreement between FEMA and a local contractor, and that local contractor continued to receive millions of dollars after that picture was taken, but there was a breakdown in communication which did not permit proper evacuation. Those buses were to be used for that. There was an agreement that was pre-existing. So that is one example, and I think the stories coming out of Asheville and places like it are much the same. FEMA messages, we're prepared to respond, we are your federal family, and now what we see is not only forgetting to use the buses for evacuation, we see blockades, we're seeing citizen volunteers turned away. And one of the most concerning things that I see right now is it used to be that FEMA kind of stood alone in their willingness to push back against kind of citizen as first responder, although their language has softened over the last couple of years. We're seeing state organizations start to take this stance as well, that government does it best. Most notably, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, when I saw this, I was aghast, said to people, we don't want your donations, we don't need your donations, and essentially your donations are a pain in the butt.
Right.
I don't know if you saw that. And people lost their minds, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
The fact that you aren't prepared to manage them means you're probably doing your federal grant paperwork instead of your job, which is probably to prepare for the onslaught of spontaneous volunteers, people who come in to your state because they want to help or they want to send donations. This is, if there is an appropriate role for state government in emergency management, we can debate that. That's probably the appropriate role, and you clearly weren't doing your job. So this idea, this kind of attitude we have toward the citizenry is, I think, indicative of some of the stuff we talked about. But I think it is coming full pass, and I think we're seeing it now in state agencies as well, and it's really a shame.
I want to get into specific examples, but I would note that my old friend, the late, great Steve Horowitz, wrote a chapter in the book published by Burkadis, co-edited by the great Virgil Storr. Mm-hmm. So, like, just a tremendous... I'd love to get a direct site on this so that people can read this, but Steve talks about an obvious Austrian theme, local knowledge, and what I would hope would be common sense for any community, any family, that local knowledge and volunteers and people that know what's happening on the ground are always going to be the best responders to a natural disaster, any crisis, and that was certainly the case during Katrina. All these federal roadblocks that you're describing, Steve documents quite eloquently how it was that community-based private enterprise, just people stepping up and doing stuff. Because this is, I mean, I don't even think it's just an American thing, but it's a quintessentially American thing that we help out our neighbors. And I'm reading all of these stories on X. I know now why the government hates X so much, because you can read all of these stories and you can see the videos and you can see documentation. And I'm sure some of it's not true, but most of it, again and again, you hear these stories about federal and state and local bureaucrats stopping people from literally saving lives. How did it get that twisted?
It's an excellent question. I think it is, and now you can see how I ended up working with the scholars at the Mercatus Center. I wasn't at George Mason. I was at University of Delaware. I was working in emergency management, and I'm just scratching my head. I'm looking for answers. Why are things the way they are? And I came upon this Hayek guy. Government has a knowledge problem. Oh, well, that's the answer. That's absolutely the answer, which is how I ended up working with Virgil and Stephanie and Emily on some of those chapters. How did it get the way it is now? I think it is the only way it ever could have gotten. There is nothing other than this when government is involved, and especially a centralized authority which has both the fiscal responsibility for disaster and kind of the strings to pull that come along with that money. It could be no other way. When we turn our community neighbor against neighbor, right? The cop who has to arrest you because you're on the beach during COVID, the public health worker that can't wait to vaccinate you and your kid with poison. When we pit neighbor against neighbor, it could be no other way, and no one is better than that than the federal government.
You're blowing my mind here. You're telling me the government doesn't care more about my family than I do?
It's almost like it doesn't. That's
wow.
right.
Wow. So let's, I don't know how many of these horror stories, but let's dig into what's happening in North Carolina. And my friend Melissa Mann just happens to be here today, and she's from Asheville, and she's telling me well-documented stories about bureaucrats actively stopping people from helping people in Asheville, even though they're not doing it. Mm-hmm. That's the logic. Have you seen some of these horror stories?
Yeah, I can tell you that even in my own career, it was standard practice after a disaster to have a period of time where homeowners and business owners were not permitted to go back in until someone in authority said it was safe. And it was a puzzling practice. If you own the property, you should be able to go back into it and retrieve your contents, get what you need to go to a hotel or a shelter, start making repairs immediately, start selling, to your friends and neighbors if you're able, if you have a business. But it is standard practice. And I think that's probably, I think that's exactly what they're dealing with. And that is not only, so it's probably not just the federal government. And this is what the people in those areas need to be aware of as they rebuild and as they rethink how maybe disaster response looks in their areas. That's their state and local bureaucrats as well. That's their neighbors. There is a process of indoctrination, I think, that comes with working with government, that it is nearly impossible to step out of that and to look at the citizen as anything other than something that is in the way, someone to be managed. And I think that the someone to be managed is the scariest part, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's how we get the central planning for disaster that we have now. And I'm sure that's exactly what they're seeing in Asheville and other places.
The presumption, you mentioned Hayek, and we have a drinking game on this show, and we should have had drinks, because every time we quote Hayek, people have to take a drink. But his fundamental critique of central planning was that you can't possibly have the infinite resources of knowledge, local knowledge, the knowledge of time and place, personal knowledge, to supplant what communities could do in this place. And that's why central planning fails. But we've absolutely done this to our response to catastrophes. And like, I think North Carolina, unlike Florida, and maybe we could get into Florida as well, but unlike Florida, which has a reasonable and rational expectation that these types of events are going to happen. So they seem to have a far more robust state and local response mechanism. But, in North Carolina and Asheville, the last time this happened, something like this, was 1916. So it's kind of a black swan event. Like, you can't necessarily have, even if federal or state bureaucracies work, like, it doesn't make sense to be ready for this.
Absolutely.
So you would totally want empowered citizens to be able to solve the problem. But comically, Secretary Mayorkas, head of Homeland Security, announced a couple days ago that they're already out of money for hurricane season.
Yeah.
And hurricane season just started. And this is like this failing up process that federal bureaucrats always do. Like we suck at our jobs. We're doing a catastrophically bad job. We've misallocated resources to other political priorities. So if you want us to do the job that we're not doing, you have to give us more money.
Yeah. And the answer is almost always yes.
Yes.
And in this case, it's hard to watch and to not want that to some extent, just to help these homeowners get past get past where they need to get past for recovery. I would say that this idea, the local knowledge that you cite, right, which only exists with people in their homes and small neighborhoods and communities. And this is really a first step at rebuilding a disaster management. I won't even call it a system of disaster management. I'm not convinced I believe in system of disaster management, but I think the first step would be we have to be honest with citizens, and we have to stop messaging that your federal family is kind of at the fore and has money and is prepared. This is the only way we can begin to claw back some of the responsibility that does rest with the citizen. And again, I think people see that message, they see the response to places like Florida and think, well, we are, my hometown must be prepared, and if they're not, then FEMA's going to come. We think we have to be honest about that, but a bureaucrat will never be honest about that. So that is really the job of nonprofits and homeowners associations and people who can come together in small groups to just decide that they're going to be prepared. But more than that, there are resources stationed in many states which have the training and capacity to respond to disaster. And half the time they're deployed to the Middle East. So yeah. I think you probably are aware right now, in Tennessee, the Defend the Guard Act was an active bill in the legislature in the last session. And it did not pass either chamber. And now those same state level legislators are going, how come our National Guard, the National Guard from Tennessee, a unit deployed the day before this hit. And I believe they are in Kuwait. That is not the appropriate place for them right now. And so I think, if we are to think about the ways to start to solve this problem, and ways to think about best use of tax dollars, already trained, well-positioned resources that are there, which are poorly used to fight bankers' wars right now, and which could be home and responding. The Defend the Guard legislature has been in 30, the Defend the Guard bill has been in 30 legislatures and has passed in 3 states, but in 3 chambers only. So not both chambers in any one state. I think we're close. This is a cause that's near and dear to my heart.
Explain briefly for people that don't know what it is. I've talked about it on my show, but I want to make sure people know what Defend the Guard is.
Yeah, absolutely. The Defend the Guard bill, which was a bill initially drafted by the 10th Amendment Center, just a shout out to them because they're awesome, and an initiative which is taken on by Bring Our Troops Home. Many people will know the work of Dan McKnight and Diego Rivera there. Intends to provide the governor authority to say no when the National Guard units from their states are called up to unconstitutional and undeclared war. As we know, Congress has not, we've been at war for decades now. Congress has yet to do their job and declare war. And so until Congress gets serious and they think there's actually a war that we should be fighting, certainly none that we're currently engaged in, and declare that those National Guard units would not be eligible for foreign deployment.
That would require them to take responsibility for the lives lost.
Yeah.
And so you're asking a lot here.
We're asking a lot, but what we're really asking for is a brave state.
Yeah.
I think the volunteers who work on this initiative, and there's so many who and they're all behind the scenes. You don't see any of them they're rarely on podcasts. Nobody's talking to them, but there are probably 30 people who are, every time there's an opportunity to phone bank in their state, they're helping out. Just kind of unsung heroes who are working on this. And I think all it is going to take is one state, maybe that state will be Tennessee, who takes this seriously, who can get it passed in both chambers. And I think there will be a domino effect in other brave states who decide that it is not only important from a disaster response perspective that our National Guard is positioned to respond during events, as you have said, that what is going on right now in North Carolina and Tennessee especially is unprecedented in the last couple of decades at least. When state legislators become serious about that and put the lives of their citizens first, that bill will start passing, and will have the added effect of maybe a little one one little ding at the foreign policy apparatus that is a monster in this country and which does terrible things.
Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Coverup, and I'm producing it in cooperation with BlazeTV. The only place you're going to see this is BlazeTV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there. Hopefully this catastrophe in North Carolina and surrounding states could be a catalyst to get citizens to sort of demand some semblance of federalism. And I know so much of your research has been based on that. And I want to go back to something that you said, and I didn't have time to research this, but I recall a couple years ago, I don't even remember which hurricane it was, but Florida got devastated. And I recall at the time the Biden administration being slow, if not totally unresponsive to the needs of Florida, because it was a red state. And it also happened to be a red state where the governor might in fact be a political rival. And, there was some hay made about that, but as I recall the story, Ron DeSantis basically said, we got this. We're going to do it ourselves. And a key part of how he did that was by getting out of the way so that civil society could actually do their jobs. Am I remembering this right, or is that sort of rose-colored glasses?
So I can't recall the storm exactly, but this is a familiar story. So I think you're on to something. And one of the things that Florida has going for it is not only a Florida National Guard, but a Florida, I'm not going to get the term right, but like a secondary defense force as well that can be activated that is not eligible for foreign deployment. So I think they also have like a defense force that is there almost solely focused on disasters. So Florida is well positioned, not only from being mindful that they're always having Florida's just kind of like a hurricane magnet, right? But also having built up, I think, a secondary defense force as well that is eligible for deployment to domestic disasters solely. I think you're right, and I think if any state was prepared for rejection of the federal government, it is Florida. I would be curious to look back at that scenario and see if they ended up accepting any of the federal aid that is usually attached with declarations.
Yeah,
so now I'm curious.
I'd be curious as well, and my assumption is that they'll always take the money, and the problem is whether or not they accept the strings that are attached to the money. I suspect is a bigger problem than taking the money itself. So how do we, as libertarians, but also as practical policy people, how do we take steps in the right direction? Because right now I'm seeing I'm having this horrible realization that everything has not only been so radically centralized but militarized since 9/11. I think that the two benchmarks in my public policy life were 9/11. The creation of the Homeland Security Administration, the Patriot Act, all of the wars in response to 9/11, the endless wars, and all of that I'm now realizing basically culminated in our response to COVID. It was a military operation.
Absolutely.
How do we even begin to unwind this? Because the trajectory here is catastrophic.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked about this already, so I won't belabor the point, but I think that passing the Defend the Guard Acts in states and state legislatures is a key piece of what we need to do next. But I'll talk a little bit about something I think that libertarians almost always get wrong. So because we believe that change isn't going to happen necessarily, especially at federal and state levels of government, libertarians need to be ambassadors for their ideas. Libertarianism is not just about doing the craziest, wildest, most outlandish thing you can with your actions, your career, the outside of you, not looking like a libertarian necessarily. But libertarians need to be taken seriously in their neighborhoods and in their communities and seen as spokespersons for accountability. Big L libertarians have more a problem with this than small L libertarians. You and I have had some funny back and forth about the party. So I think that when we are seen as ambassadors, good ambassadors for our ideas, and we are seen in our own homes and neighborhoods taking accountability, leading change, talking about shrinking, libertarians like to talk about eliminating government. I do too, but you have to start somewhere. Talking about shrinking government, talking about increasing local responsibility, and that I don't mean local government, but when libertarians are ambassadors for our ideas and we can be taken seriously, seen as kind of professional in our field, I think that change can start there. The libertarian as the joke, that has to go away, because I think we do have a role to play. So I think we start there. That's like a thing the individual can do. The thing our neighborhoods can do is prepare together and realize you're not going to save everyone. There are some people who are blind to what the risks and threats around them are. And you'll be able to do very little for those people, but it does not hurt to plan with your neighbors, to talk about what opportunities you have to trade, to barter, who has what supplies. I think sometimes when we talk with that, we have some neighbors who say, you guys are like crazy, like preppers. You have like the woods and your chickens and your things you put in, and that's like the impression that some of our neighbors have of us, right? It's hilarious. So, but yeah, I mean, we're those guys, right? Like that's what we do. And I think that helping your neighborhoods, helping your communities to do more of that is good. So again, a thing you can do as an individual, thing you can do as kind of a household and community. But honestly, I think more than anything, men need to get angry. We are being led by the nose by an evil federal government. And that federal government has now, with DHS, not just DHS and FEMA money, but also with like Department of Justice funding, other federal grants, right, that come out of like the fire service. The federal government has grown its tentacles into funding the careers that are traditionally set aside for men in our neighborhoods. It's not something we're talking a lot about, but I think there's probably something there. When our men, who should naturally be the protectors of our communities, when our men are funded by an evil federal government, something is happening. When the helping professions, naturally taken on by men, are connected to making sure someone is arrested on the beach, making sure a family cannot play softball, making sure that grant compliance work is, that grant compliance paperwork is filled out. When this is what we have our men doing, there is no making changes. I'm not saying that women don't have a role, but when this is what our men are doing, and they're not standing up and saying no more in this community, when they're not outraged, when they're not screaming at the top of their lungs, right? I think that there is absolutely a problem, and it is one that is intractable until those people stand up, until men say, this isn't going to go on in my community anymore. We're going to be prepared, and we need. And in that model of men stepping up, one of the things I really love about what the Mises Caucus is doing is looking at local elections from a standpoint of, can we put a sheriff here that will not participate in federal task forces? Can we put a sheriff here who will push back when the feds try to come in? That sheriff has more power than anyone gives that position credit for. So I love that the Mises Caucus is looking at kind of local governance and putting libertarians in those seats who will push back. But until we are willing to do that, and unfortunately, I think until some jurisdiction becomes the example, and that may not play out the way that we hope it will. It we may see a ratchet effect, but I think that until we have that tete-a-tete between a sheriff and a federal agency, that I think we all know it's coming, right? Until we see that, I think we cannot see change. But depending on how that goes, and depending on whether or not other people will stand up in their jurisdictions and say this isn't going to happen here anymore, cut the apron strings is hard with the federal dollars because those are valuable and jurisdictions use them to build their bureaucracies up. And until men aren't interested in behaving like that anymore, I think we will continue to have a problem.
Yeah, you mentioned that first responders, the category surely is dominated, not exclusively, but it's a man-based career.
So let's talk about that
Now
for
they're
a second.
now they're bureaucrats.
Yeah, so now those men now those men are building small empires in small counties across the country that don't need to be there, right? More administrative, less hands-on. But one of the things that is really curious, and one of the things I wrote about in my most recent piece for Dissident Media is that one of the things that FEMA has done very low key, very quietly, has made emergency management like a kinder and gentler emergency management. I could see the language of the left start to seep in over the last decade or two. Whole community, collaborative, not that these are bad words, but we know these as the language of the left, right?
They're code words for.
They're code words used
in
appropriately.
ideology, yeah.
Right, in your neighborhood, they're wonderful, but when they're used by your federal family, it's a little more insipid. We've seen the language of the left creep in to federal documentation. I don't know if you're familiar with like the whole community approach is what FEMA adopts now as like everybody is involved, everybody has the same role, everybody is engaged, and it is like just intended to placate. Until we are prepared to right the ship in our jurisdictions, I don't think we're going to see much change there.
Yeah. So let's give people some resources to dig into this a little bit more. You mentioned Dissident Media, your media startup company with your husband. Give us a shameless plug for that project.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dissident Media, people might know right now as kind of a very active Twitter account. But over the coming year, we will be rolling out a series of content creators. These people will be dissidents from the center right and maybe even left. The way I think about how we will bring content creators on is, if you were good on COVID and you're good on war, probably there's an opportunity for us to have a conversation.
Those are pretty good litmus tests. I
Those
think.
are good litmus tests because you have everybody from Jimmy Dore to Dave Smith, right?
Yeah.
These are folks that everyone wants to hear from and who have respect because they're good on those two issues. And so we will roll out a series of content creators over the coming year. You know how we're kind of working the back end stuff, right? Contracts with attorneys and looking at investment, looking at how to best roll that out. But you will slowly see we are building a stable of authors. That started to trickle out over the last week. You'll see us with merch coming soon, and then I think closer to the end of the year, you'll see us with launching our first shows. But the audience is, it's in the name, right? We're looking for people who are dissident and disaffected by current and traditional media, and I think we'll grow slow. We're having fun with what we're doing, though.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool. So I watched a speech that you recently gave, I think, to the Delaware Libertarian Party. I'm not sure. And you mentioned this earlier, but I want to stop my ending that I was just leading to and go back to this question of how we engage people outside of the weird libertarian ideological bubble. And I'm in the bubble. Like I'm one of those weirdo guys. So I say this with love and affection, but I'm also obsessed with the language we use and the stories we tell, and our eager willingness to disavow anybody who doesn't quite check all of the boxes. And my joke, which is not a joke, is that I am the only libertarian, and everybody else is not quite good enough.
Isn't that the truth?
We all suffer from this disease. But you just mentioned the spectrum, Jimmy Dore to Dave Smith. And I'm particularly fascinated and encouraged by this anti-authoritarian coalition that's emerging. And part of it was we can call it Maha maybe, but it's I don't like it's bigger than that, because it's not just about former people from the left who have become anti-authoritarians who are now holding their nose and supporting Trump. It's much broader than that. I think there's a fundamental political realignment, and we libertarians should be at the center of that. How do we tap into that? Because to me, having a little bit of empathy for people that are trying to figure out, they know what they don't like, and they see the authoritarian left, and they see the speech police, and they see the never-ending wars, and they see the COVID authoritarianism, and they're like, wow, I thought I was part of a community that was liberal. Yeah. Turns out it's just authoritarian. And they're looking around and like, well, I guess I got to go over there. But of course, we have this third way of thinking about the world that is all about everything we just talked about. It's about community-based, local, people helping people, peaceful cooperation. And I know you've thought a lot about this, and I'm not sure the Libertarian Party is going to solve this problem. I suspect it's probably not going to, but what is your path forward on this subject?
Yeah, I think I'm going to surprise you a little bit. I will in a second talk about the party and what the party is doing, but I'll start by saying that Dissident Media was at the Rescue the Republic event with RFK and a lot of Jordan Peterson, a lot of the coalition that is kind of emerging around or next to really the MAGA coalition, who appear to just be a group of people who the thing they have in common is a concern about authoritarianism. And I think that event was exemplary. And one of the planners of that event was the chair of the Libertarian Party, Angela McArdle. And I don't think everybody realizes that. And so while the Libertarian Party writ large will not solve the problem, and I think still has many years before it is an effective force in elections, one of the things it is doing under her leadership is wielding some influence. You know, Trump showed up, and so did RFK, I believe, to the Libertarian Party convention this year. That is unprecedented. It is unheard of that libertarians would even meet the mark of an event that folks like that should attend. And under her leadership, I think that the party is learning to wield influence, right? Electoral success, that's a down the road thing maybe for the party, but wielding influence and wielding that small percentage of the vote that libertarians represent. But more than that, representing, kind of standing at the heart of the issues that this country faces and saying, and you're a good example of this, Matt, we've been talking about this for years. Let's talk about it together, right? We've been talking about authoritarianism. We were right on COVID. We were right on the Patriot Act. We were right on 9/11 and the militarization that would follow that. And I think that there is an increasing, especially sect from the right, that is starting to look at even foreign policy, which is kind of mind-blowing from the right? You're really starting to see people go, hold on here. Where did that funding go that could have been for people here in North Carolina and Tennessee? Wait a minute, if we really support the troops, does that mean sending them to bankers' wars? I think there's an increasing sect from the right that is thinking about this. That sect, joined with libertarians, joined with people from the left, who are disaffected, have an incredibly powerful voice. And I think you're going to see a lot more come out of like the Rescue the Republic coalition.
Yeah, I know that Angela had brought Brett Weinstein to Freedom Fest this year. Mm-hmm. So I know that coalition is happening and robust. And I think it's absolutely the right move to make. And I'm encouraged by that. So Dissident Media, we've talked about. I'd love to give people the citation for the book that I mentioned, because I think it would be a good, as you're trying to make sense of the current disaster, that book I think is pretty useful. Where would people find that book? I don't even remember the title of the book.
Yeah, so published by the under Powell's Grove, I think, by the Mercatus Center. The title, there are 2 volumes, and I get their titles confused sometimes, but I can certainly make sure you have it for your show notes. But I think Government Responses to Crisis is the one that you're referring to, and I think the Horowitz article was in there as well.
Cool. Anything else that you want to shamelessly promote?
Not at all. Not at all. Our latest effort, you can find at Dissident Media for me, and I'm grateful that you had me here, Matt.
I'm glad we finally got to talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.